Okay, I'll start with a few terms. The main thing I'm going to be talking about is consequentialism, and that's an ethical theory. You can see on the screen here is a basic disagreement in ethics. On one side, you have consequentialists who say that the right action is the one that causes the best consequences. So simple definition, it comes in different forms. You can define good consequences in different ways. Utilitarianism would be the most common form of consequentialism. So that's one side. On the other side, you have people saying that there's some actions we should rule out no matter what their consequences are. Murder and torture would be common examples. I'm not going to show pictures of that. So this is a real conflict in theoretical ethics. You have, on the one hand, it seems right to say that we should do whatever causes the best consequences, because why would we do anything else? On the other hand, it also seems that there's some things that we shouldn't even consider, like murder and torture, particularly if we're talking about innocent children, things that, even to be open to it, seem like a problem. So this is a fundamental disagreement, and we could say a lot about this disagreement, but one proposal to make some progress here comes from Joshua Green. And he's not the only one who has this line of research, but he's the main one. And his idea is that we can make progress in these debates by learning more about how our brains work. So by studying the processes that underlie these different moral judgments, we can see that some are reliable and some are not. And that's the argument that I'm going to be talking about now. So Green has what's called a debunking argument for consequentialism. The idea is that he's going to debunk the reasons people have not to believe in consequentialism. And we'll start, you can see the argument here. There's some technical details that I'm not too familiar with, and I'm not going to get into it. But the first premise is the premise that comes directly from psychology. By studying the way that people's brains works through fMRIs and other techniques like reaction times and so on, Green found what you see here, that consequentialist judgments are what he calls preferentially supported by conscious reasoning. And non-consequentialist judgments are preferentially supported by automatic brain processes or intuitions. And a case that Green talks about quite a bit is one that some of you have heard me talk about, one of the many Trolley cases. And there's only one Trolley case here today, so I won't go into all the details that some of you, I know Mike is bored of hearing me talk about all these Trolley cases. He talks a lot about plagiarism, I talk about trolleys. Just one Trolley case today, though. And the example of the consequentialist judgment comes from this famous case by Judith Jarvis Thompson. You can see the scenario pictured there. There's a runaway trolley, and it's about to hit 5 people who are tied to the trolley tracks for some reason that we don't really know why. Also, for some reason, you're standing on a bridge, and you can see what's going on. And you're an expert, and you know all the physics here. You know that the only way you can stop this trolley from hitting and killing the 5 people is by putting a very heavy object in its path. Fortunately, there happens to be standing on the bridge with you a fat man. That's the term that Thompson uses. I think massive man is more accurate. So the fat man or the massive man. And the issue here is, do you push the man off the bridge so the trolley hits him and doesn't hit the 5 people? You save 5 lives at the expense of 1. Green says an example of what he calls characteristically consequentialist judgment would be the judgment that you should push the fat man. Right? There are different ways he phrases it. It's acceptable to push the man so that he stops the trolley and you save the 5 lives. The non-consequentialist judgment, or deontological would be another term people use, is that pushing the man is wrong. And most people, when presented with this case, say that pushing the man is wrong. Even though it's the only way to save 5 lives, we still shouldn't push him off the bridge so that his body stops the trolley. And Green presented this case, among other cases, to people and studied how their brains work when they make different moral judgments. And you can see there, what he found was that people who say that it's okay to push the fat man tend to have more activity in the parts of the brain that are associated with conscious reasoning, while people who say that you should not push the fat man, they have more activity in the parts of the brain associated with intuition or automatic brain processes. There's more we could say about preferentially supported, but I'm not really going to challenge that premise. I think that even if there are some questions about the studies, that's probably true, what he's saying here. Moving on, and this would be one of the important parts of Green's argument that's not coming directly from psychology. He argues that our intuitions, or the judgments that come from automatic brain processes, are often reliable, but not always. Specifically, he argues that we shouldn't trust our intuitions in what he calls unfamiliar situations. Unfamiliar could be a situation with me personally, or people in general don't have enough experience with them. I'll give a couple examples. There are many more that I could give, and there's a bit of a technical definition. of what would make something unfamiliar, but I'll skip that for now. Reliable intuitions would be something like a chess grandmaster's intuitions. So if I'm playing chess against a grandmaster, I could sit there and calculate for several minutes and not come anywhere close to being as accurate as the grandmaster is, because he has a lot of experience playing chess. He's seen these positions before, or has seen similar positions before, and he might think, even without calculating, I know that taking his queen is too risky, I'm not going to do that. Or I know that putting the knight there, that just doesn't feel right, so I'm going to put it somewhere else. That'd be somebody's intuition in a familiar situation. I probably could spend more time talking about this other example here of the unfamiliar one. This is the famous Monty Hall paradox, or Monty Hall problem. The basic idea is that you're on Let's Make a Deal, and you have 3 doors. One door has a car, the other 2 both have goats. You pick door number 3, then the host opens one of the other doors and asks you if you want to switch. I think you would, Let's Make a Deal with Monty Hall was a little bit before my time. I'm not quite that old. But I've seen the show a bit, I know of it, and I think he would pay you, like for $1,000, I'll pay you to switch. Surprisingly, well, at least it seems at first, that the odds wouldn't really change. You have a 1 in 3 shot no matter what you do. If you're ever in that situation, take that deal and switch, because it does improve your odds from a 1 in 3 to 2 in 3, which is sort of counterintuitive, but when you, I'm not going to lay out all the reasoning why, but trust me, and you can see it explained there. The odds are better if you switch, even though it feels like it doesn't really matter, or it's even riskier if you switch. The right decision is to switch. Well, that's a situation that's unfamiliar, right? We don't have intuitions that have been adapted to be on a Let's Make a Deal. It's not anything that's similar to anything in my personal experience or human history in general. So that'd be a case where our intuitions are unreliable. And moving to the sorts of cases that are most important for this talk here, Green and others say, well, if you have a choice, like you have to decide, are you going to push somebody off of a cliff to get revenge? That just feels wrong. Green says, go ahead and trust that intuition, because that's a familiar situation. For thousands and thousands of years, or hundreds of thousands of years, I guess, or millions, I don't know. Humans have been pushing each other for revenge and causing deaths in this way, and we've developed this aversion to causing deaths in a violent way like that. And Green thinks it's a good thing as humans that we do. That's one reason why we can get together here in relative peace and talk and have discussions. If we were always fighting, then our tribe wouldn't be very successful, and we'd be killed off. So that's if you're tempted to push somebody off a bridge to get revenge, that's a familiar situation. Green thinks that intuitions are reliable there. But he claims that these sort of cases that provide the challenges to consequentialism, those are unfamiliar situations, and we shouldn't trust our intuitions there. So these intuitions or the results of automatic brain processes, those are unreliable when we get to unfamiliar problems like the trolley cases. And then Green says, you can read the quote there, the objection to consequentialism depends on these sorts of cases, not just the case about pushing a man off the bridge to stop a trolley, but other similar kind of cases. And Green says, apart from those, we don't have any reason to deny consequentialism. He says that utilitarianism or consequentialism is a splendid idea. You can see the quote there. The objection isn't that it's based on a generally bad idea. We all agree that we should do what has the best consequences, but then we're held back by these intuitions about unfamiliar situations. So Green thinks if we debunk those intuitions, then we'll be left following consequentialism. And you can see the whole argument all at once here. The idea, again, is that we all think it's a good idea to do what causes the best consequences. We're held back by these intuitions. When we see that the intuitions aren't reliable, we'll have no reason not to do whatever causes the best consequences. So that's the conclusion of the argument. Not a direct argument for consequentialism, but trying to debunk reasons not to believe in consequentialism. And Green takes consequentialism as the kind of default position or the fallback. So according to him, if we debunk these other intuitions, then we're all going to be left with consequentialism. Okay. Now, here's my example, sort of a parallel argument to go with Green's argument to show what I think are the flaws with Green's argument. And I'll try to go through it somewhat quickly here. You can see the point here. It doesn't really matter what the technology is, but a football coach says, we have a chance to use this new technology. It's going to make us more likely to win. The running back says, no, I don't think so. I want to win by playing the other team. I don't want to win just because we have gene editing or nanobots or whatever it is. The quarterback says, yep, let's do it. We're not breaking the rules, so go for it. There's no reason not to. And they have this disagreement. The team psychologist steps in. Unlikely that a high school football team is going to have a team psychologist, but bear with me for the example. And you can see the argument the team psychologist makes. He hooks up the quarterback and running back and other players to the fMRI machine and does other kind of wizardry with different testing and says, I have the results in. The quarterback's judgment is produced by conscious reasoning. The running back's judgment is produced by intuitions. And this is an unfamiliar situation because it's a new way of getting getting advantages over our opponent that aren't related to playing well or skill or preparation. Usually, if you have an advantage, you have to break the rules. This case is unusual. So we shouldn't trust our intuitions in this case. And apart from intuitions, of course, we all agree that we should do whatever we can to win within the rules, so we don't have any reason to disagree with the quarterback. Basically, a debunking argument of what the running back says, saying clear out that intuition, and you're going to be left agreeing with the quarterback. Now, I'll just have time to talk about a couple objections here. The first objection to Green and to the team psychologist is that you're going to have to figure out, and it's not going to come from psychology, which situations are familiar and which ones are not. And I think the Charlie case is a good example of the problem here. Green takes that as an unfamiliar problem about saving lives, but you could imagine somebody, I would argue, that we could also see it as a familiar problem about causing good consequences by treating someone unjustly. It's not clear that that sort of thing is anything new in human history. Being able to do it with a trolley is something new, but being able to kill somebody unjustly is certainly nothing new, even from far away. Like we see Pontius Pilate here. You could find other examples in literature as well of people killing somebody else in an unjust way without having the kind of up-close and personal violence that we get in the trolley case. Similarly, in the football case, we could say, well, wait a minute, is this really an unfamiliar case because it involves gene editing or nanobots or something, or is it a familiar case about getting an advantage unfairly? That's one objection. A related one, this is really my main objection. You may have thought of this already. The team psychologist and Green are both assuming that our goal, and our only goal in this case, is to cause the good consequences or to win within the rules. And that's certainly a controversial assumption that not everybody agrees with. Particularly with the football case, you can see it would make sense for the running back to say, I know that we'd be more likely to win if we don't use this technology, but I don't want to win at all cost. I also want to do other things like include my teammates, play by the rules, and so on and so on. Similarly, another way to criticize consequentialism is to say it's not leaving any room to value friendships or our family or anything, or any other kind of particular relationship if we have to maximize happiness impartially. Now here I think the analogy might break down a bit. You can see the consequentialist might say, well, that's fine for playing football. You might have other goals, and the team psychologist argument is a bad one. But if we're really thinking clearly, we're not going to let anything, including loyalty to friends or our intuitions about pushing people off of bridges, stop us from causing the best consequences. And I think this sort of argument is very characteristic of consequentialism, thinking that it's not just one theory among many, but if you disagree, you must not be thinking clearly. Of course, I hope that I'm thinking clearly, even though I disagree. The objection I would have to this sort of argument is a more fundamental objection that doesn't really depend on any particular cases. I know I'm almost out of time, so I'll go quickly here. For consequentialism to work, there has to be some way that we can measure all these different consequences together. We take all these different goods in life to figure out what the best consequences are. If we don't have a single goal in life, it's not clear that these different goods can be commensurable in that way or measured together. And if different goods are incommensurable, then the appeal to the best consequences doesn't really do any good. So we're not so much arguing by denying consequentialism that we should choose worse consequences over better ones, because I think consequentialists are right that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Why settle for less when you can have more? But the argument would be that these terms like best consequences or greater good, maximum happiness, and so on, they don't really refer to anything at all. So instead of saying, we're going to hold you back from going after the best consequences, a non-consequentialist, I think, should argue that that whole idea of the best consequences or greater good is confused in the first place. Not to be confused, my final comment, I say that this argument wouldn't apply to the way that the common good is usually understood, but the way that the consequentialists talk about the greater good or maximization of welfare, that's different from the way that we would talk about the common good. Okay, I see that my time is just about up, so I will stop here. Thank you. Are we going to take questions or do, okay. Yeah, we have time. Okay, I'd be happy to take your questions. Valerie.
Is consequentialism always about what is like the best for everyone, or is it ever applied in what's best for me?
It could be. Usually people who defend consequentialism would be utilitarians as well. Say that the best consequences are the consequences with the most overall happiness. If you were defending egoism, you could say the best consequences are what's best for me. Even then, I think you'd have the problem that you're going to have some standard to figure out even what's best for you. But usually, people who defend consequentialism are talking about what's best for people overall, not just for one particular individual.
And my other question had to do with intuition. I know that sometimes when they look at intuitive problems, how the problem is worded makes a dramatic
Yes.
impact on whether or not people can solve it.
Yes.
So 1 out of 5 versus 1/5 can sometimes make a dramatic
Yeah.
problem. So does creating address that?
Yes. I think that's a short answer. He does do that. I would say maybe not always satisfactory. Like one, without getting too far into the weeds of the details here, one version of that trial case that he uses is you have, as opposed to having a fat man, you have a man wearing a backpack. And you have, now, well, it doesn't make any difference whether it's a backpack or not. Well, maybe not. You could imagine an argument that now we're using the backpack, not the person, to get on the tracks. And am I throwing the backpack on and the guy's just attached to it, or am I pushing the man to get the backpack down there? I think if you start with the idea that all that matters is how many lives we save, it doesn't matter, right? Who cares? If it's a backpack, large man, all the same. But making that kind of change, I think is significant. Oh, for sure. Yes. And the order, too. Like if you get other questions first and then get this trial case, you're more likely to say different things. Right? Sure. Lindsay.
So I sense a bit of a bit of a circularity in the dream. Can you address that? Defining the reliability condition and then trying to say, familiar experiences contribute to reliable conditions or intuitions. And, that feels really tight.
Yes, I think I'll defend him, even though I'm criticizing here. He would say we can define what a familiar situation is or unfamiliar situation without making any presuppositions about what's right and wrong. So,
Can you do that without any presuppositions about reliable intuition about those situations?
I think so. I think he would say, in general, your intuitions won't be reliable in an unfamiliar situation. Not to say that they're always wrong or that they couldn't be true, but it would be a stroke of good luck if they were. Right? He uses the phrase, no cognitive miracles. It would be a cognitive miracle if our intuitions were reliable even in unfamiliar situations.
So what about this, so I was thinking like for philosophers who these counterexamples to utilitarianism or for push balloons become very
More familiar, right?
talk about them a lot.
Yeah.
Just
That's a good question. I'm sure in some way you could say that talking about a situation would be some kind of preparation for it. Like I could try to teach somebody how to drive by talking about it, doing some kind of classroom instruction. Although still, it's going to be different when you're actually in the car. That's one of the examples he uses. So I think you'd say even if these cases are widely discussed, then you have philosophers who think about them a lot. They're still going to be unfamiliar in the sense that they're weird cases that we don't encounter in our everyday lives. And he thinks that the moral theories that people defend are ways of rationalizing the intuitions they have about these unfamiliar cases, at least the non-consequentialist intuitions. Of course, I think that's wrong, and I think that it is a problem saying, like, you're going to take the trial case as an unfamiliar problem instead of a familiar one. In some sense, it's familiar, some sense it's unfamiliar. He used an example about a camera, say, like the two kind of brain processes would correspond to manual mode and automatic mode with a camera. The idea, I think the problem there is you're assuming that the goal is to take good pictures. There's one goal of photography, so you can see why you want to have both modes. And something like, they said, well, this is an unfamiliar situation because it's never been this day before. We said, well, that's not what I mean by unfamiliar, of course. It's in broad daylight, that's familiar. But you're going to have to specify what makes it familiar and what makes it unfamiliar. Thanks. You out of time? Okay. Thank you.